Good morning. It's great to see you all today. Thank you again for inviting me. What I want to do today is talk about what controls your body weight. And in particular, I want to talk about why many of us, as we get older, actually start to lose a lot of weight. This slide shows a spectrum of human existence, I think. On the one end, we have an elderly lady who's obviously very thin. And on the other side, we have a young child who's obviously not thin. If you've been to the Prado Museum in Madrid, you might have seen the little lady before. Her name is Eugenia Martinez Vallejo. She was born, I think, in 1676. And we think that she had a condition called Prader-Willi syndrome. At any rate, at the age of 1 year old, she weighed 55 pounds. And at the age of 6, 155 pounds. So what we want to talk about today is what controls the body weight. How is one person thin, the other person heavy? And this lecture will be actually very oriented towards obesity, because that's the way that most research has been done. Not a lot's been done specifically, as much anyway, as anorexia and weight loss. But that's okay, because we currently believe that weight loss and what controls that, and weight gain and what controls that, are actually the same factors, different sides of the same coin, if you will. So we'll be able to sort of learn about control of body weight, why we tend to want to gain weight, and then talk about why we seem to violate those rules and lose weight. So at first, it would seem very simple. There's really only two factors that determine how much you weigh. On the one factor, it's how many calories do you bring in? And on the other side, it's how many calories do you burn off? Now, it's a little bit like your bank account or building wealth. If you spend less than you make, your bank account goes up. And if you spend more than you make, your bank account goes down. There's a lot of analogies between economics and body weight. And it's because they both deal in sort of the same thing, intake and outgo, inflow and outgo. And so the same goes for here. And the real question is, what controls those two factors? What controls your desire to eat and how much you can ingest? And what controls your desire or your need to burn those calories? Now, as you all know, we've been in an epidemic of obesity for a long time. And I always think this slide is very interesting because it shows that obesity is going to increase throughout the world. This was published a number of years ago from the year in comparing levels of obesity, or diabetes rather, a consequence of obesity, in the year 2000 versus projected for 2030. And you see that it's going up in everywhere. The red bars are what it is in 2000. The blue bars are what is considered to be likely in 2030, a 30 years difference. And you see all the blue bars are greater than the red bars. But in some places, areas you wouldn't necessarily think are obesity-prone areas are the areas that will show the greatest increase in diabetes. China will go up by over 100%, and India and South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, many of the South America will go up 140, 150, or even more percent. And this is reflected because of the epidemic of obesity, if you will. The only place that looks a little bit like it might survive is, well, nowhere. And the Cook Islands, interestingly, seem to have the worst case. We have a different set of statistics for that. It was estimated in 1966, Cook Islands had 14% obesity, and in 1996, 30 years later, had 1 in 2 people were obese. Now, what this shows is a worldwide phenomenon, and therefore unlikely to be in the drinking water of Seattle that's explaining it. It's got to be in everybody's drinking water or something shared with humanity. And one clear thing is that there's been a big change in our lifestyle since our ancestors, even 1 or 2 generations ago. So let's think back of how our ancestors, the caveman, might have worked and lived and eaten. So here we have a cute slide. I love this one because you can tell these guys, this is not easy. Okay, they finally got a lot of meat to eat, but it wasn't easy to do this. They had to work hard. It's a dangerous work and that kind of thing. And it reminds me to say that we had, as most of our life existence as a species, and wild animals as well, have to spend calories to make calories. I remember this old adage, in a business, you have to spend money to make money. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly true in the world of weight gain and weight loss, that we have traditionally had to work hard to get those calories. And we're often on the knife edge. And this is one of the things you'll kind of see over and over, particularly when we talk about wild animals, that it's very difficult sometimes to get those calories, hang on to them, and to make a profit. That is, make extra calories. Very different than the way we live now, where we don't hunt wild rhinoceros. We hunt the wild refrigerator, which is usually a few steps away and doesn't put up much of a fight. And it affects our animals as well. Again, showing it's not just a human thing. It's just not an isolated thing. This is a worldwide event. It's lifestyle. And to show you what I mean by this is, a few years ago, I was in Egypt, in Luxor, and I got, you know how it is when you travel, sometimes you just get this craving for American food. And for me, it's always craving for stuff I would probably never eat in America, because it's, not, I'd never go to McDonald's in here, but when I'm in foreign countries, sometimes I do. So I went to KFC this day, and notice what the guy did. He upsized me automatically. I didn't ask him. He just gave me extra portions and extra size. And to this day, I don't know if he did this to everybody, or if he said, oh, this guy's an American or a European. He says, of course, he'll want more food. But it cost me 136 more in Egyptian lira. And what can I say? It was really good. But anyway, so let's say that you weigh 30 pounds overweight. How much is that? There's about 3,500 calories in a pound. So that works out to 105,000 calories. Now, how much would you have to gain? How much would you have to overeat every day in order to gain that 30 pounds in 10 years? And as you can see, it's just simple math. Divide by the number of years, the number of the days. Turns out to be 29 calories. 29 calories is all you have to overeat. So I had a friend that gave a similar lecture to this, and he said it's about 1 potato chips extra calories a day, and you can have weight problems. So this tells us a couple of things. It tells us that the controls that control our body weight are very well attuned, and they're very precise at measuring how many calories we want to get in. That's not the issue. The issue is it is biased towards having, if it's given a choice, we'll eat a few more calories rather than a few less calories. Now, how bad is this? Well, here's one M&M contains about 3 calories. And according to the internet, you have to walk the length of 1 football field, about 100 yards, to burn off that 3 calories. And this is actually one of the questions I asked. And the answer is, the question is, to burn off 1 M&M, do you have to walk 50 yards? And I put false because it's 100 yards. I've since rechecked this math. They're wrong. It's about 50 yards. So if you put true on that, you'll get it. And don't feel bad if you don't make 100%, because what I'm telling you is my own test, I made myself, I only made 90. Okay, 90%. But it's still tremendous. And if we go back and we, from the previous slide, and we calculate, let's figure 9 pounds of fat is about a gallon of fat. So the human being, I don't know how much your car gets, maybe you got electric cars now, but the old gas cars, 15, 20, 30, 40 miles a gallon. Human being gets on a gallon of fat about 350 miles. So we get about 350 miles a gallon. Now, I think there's a really cool story here, and that's the garbage-eating baboons that live in East Africa. And I'll just tell you that story quickly because it illustrates a few more points. So Jean Altman is an anthropologist who lives in East Africa, and she has a very interesting group of animals that she watches. Now, this little guy lives in the forest, and baboons, they get up in the morning and they brush their teeth and they, shower, and then they go out and they forage all day long in the forest and finding food. And it's pretty easy. There's lots of food in the forest, but they walk about 6 to 10 kilometers a day. Now, there's another group that she studies, and these baboons say, what's going on? Why work so hard? There's a village just like a quarter of a mile from the edge of the forest. We're going to go over there. and raid the garbage dumps in the morning before anybody gets up and get all our fill and then get back. So these guys walk about 1 kilometer a day at most. And here's one of those guys. Now, I think you can see he's quite a bit fatter. So this is he's doing what most Americans, what most people in the world are doing, better access, more access to calories, and but less exercise, less effort to get them. And we decided to collaborate with Gene and said, we can measure all these hormones and do all this fancy stuff if you give us some of their blood and give us some of their measurements, how big they are, how tall they are, or wide they are, and that kind of thing. So here's some of that data. This is their leptin level. I'll talk a little bit more about leptin in a moment, but basically right now, the higher your leptin level, the more fat you have. And you see there's two sets of animals here. There's these are the ones that are eating the garbage. And there's 4 guys that really got obese. These are the no garbage guys. And if you look really, really carefully, these guys who are not really all that obese, but their average level is just a smidgen above the no garbage. And this is sort of what happens in the human population. A lot of people can be around the food and they will gain only about 10, 20% above what your body weight would be if you were a hunter-gatherer and be our ideal body weight. And there's a subgroup that gain much more weight. And so it's a very polygenetic, so to speak. And here's actually the levels of ideal body weight in the 3 groups. So here's the no garbage guys. So we say they're normal, they're 100%. The low leptin guys, the guys who don't look like they've gained as much weight, they've gained about 15% or so. And then these guys, the high garbage guys, have gained about 30%. So let's say your ideal body weight's 150 pounds. These guys would be clock in about 195 pounds. And so they're the obese group. And this is sort of where many other people are. And they have high glucose levels in that obese group. They got diabetes. They have high insulin levels. That means they have insulin resistance diabetes or type 2 diabetes. That's the diabetes humans get, kind of diabetes we get when we get obese. They have hyperlipidemia, high cholesterol levels. And we can actually, using the no garbage group as the normative, we can actually diagnose diseases in these animals. So of the low garbage group, the garbage eaters that aren't obese, one of them has diabetes and hyperlipidemia. The others have sort of early stage disease, and 3 out of 7 are okay. They're fine. But the garbage eaters that are obese, they all have insulin resistance too. That's 50% rank diabetes. And interestingly, none of them had hyperlipidemia. So you see, this is really evidence that the lifestyle is what causes the obesity. Now, the question is, why, when we eat, don't we just give up? When we've got enough to eat, then our tummies are full, how come we just don't, I want to go jog and run off some of those calories or go to sleep? And that's really one of the key questions to explain the epidemic of obesity. And I love this guy named Ernst Mayr. Many of you probably heard of him. He was an evolutionist that really explained a lot of biological phenomenon. And he said no biological problem is solved until both the proximate evolutionary causation has been elucidated. Furthermore, the study of evolutionary causes is as legitimate a part of biology as is the study of the unusually physical, chemical, proximate causes. I think this is also true in the field of medicine. We don't understand the medical problem until we understand the proximate evolutionary causes. That is, what did our body, our ancestors, how did it handle things? Because sometimes some diseases are conditions in which we have just taken what we were designed to do and put in a condition that we're not designed to live in. And that often causes, and anthropology has lots of these sorts of things. And I think that obesity is one of them. Now, if that's true, then we've got to go back to the primitive brain, because the brain is really going to be the key here of what controls your appetite. And that means we got to go back to reptiles, right? So imagine here's the human brain down here, and you got this big cortex on top that does all your thinking and your accounting and tells you should live in Maribel instead of this other place. or something like that. You strip all that away and you're down to an alligator brain. So, and that's got all the reflexes and information that's by and large telling us what to eat. Now, the cortex, the smart part, gets involved too, because we know that eating is very social, right? So if your grandmother comes to you and says you have to have an extra piece of cake, that's the cortex, but everything else, the part telling you, oh no, I can't eat anymore, that's the alligator brain. So what does an alligator do when it's ready to eat? It's presented with this nice juicy meal. What happens? Does it just go out and eat? That seems pretty straightforward. And the answer is eating is not straightforward. There's at least three major phases. There's the ingestion. That's where you take it in and you chew it up and you swallow it. There's the digestion. That's where you extract all of the elements and good stuff. And there's the excretion, which we won't talk about because we're in polite company. But the thing is, all of these are complex. All of these are internally integrated. And what's more, each of these are integrated with the other one. You can't digest before you ingest. And if ingestion doesn't go right, causes digestion problems. For example, many people in older age or with autoimmune diseases can't make enough saliva, dry mouth syndrome. And that really affects your ability to chew, swallow food. And that's actually one of the causes or contributors, I should say, to weight loss. So all of these are highly integrated. And to be integrated, they have to have hormones. Those are substances secreted by one tissue that goes to another tissue and tells you how to work. Neuronal input, be it the brain, the vagus, all your nerves, or even the local nerves in the stomach, which tells the muscles what to do and makes propulsion, because the food has to go in the right direction, right? And it has to be in this spot when it's ready, when it's been digested, and then go to the next spot, because different things are absorbed in different parts of the intestine and stomach. There's secretory. You've got to secrete the enzyme and you've got to secrete the acids at the right time in order for everything to work. So it's very complicated. What controls this? Still another level of monoamines, peptides, and regulatory proteins. Many of these are from the brain, in the brain, or interact with the brain. So what we have here is a three-way communication between the gut, the brain, and even your fat is talking. And those three legs on the stool determine your weight loss. But as the Ronco guy says, there's more. And the more is that this is overlaid in a yin-yang between environment and genetics. And this is why it's so complicated, that it's not just input and output, but it's all these factors put together. Now, let's take a quick look at one of the hormones, and it caused a sensation in science when it was finally elucidated, and that is a major hormone that comes from the fat. It tells the brain how much fat you have. And if that system goes bad, you either lose a lot of weight or you usually more often you gain weight. So here's how the story began. Back in the 1950s, there were, say I was a scientist in 1945, and I wanted to do animal research. Where do I get my animals? Well, you all have heard, I'm sure, the story that if you were a medical student, you had to go out and get your own cadaver, more or less. Well, that's certainly true of the animals. You had to go out and you had to find your own rat or dog or medical student on which to experiment. And so these guys about 1940s, 50s say, hey, there's farmers over there. They're growing cows and pigs for people to use. What about if we grow the experimental animals for scientists to use? I bet we can make some money. And you know what? They were right. So then they had another idea. Well, we're really interested in not only normal physiology, but disease. So why don't we keep our eyes out and see if there's ever a genetic problem or a disease or something like that? And then we'll have models of disease, and this will help not only help science, it'll boost sales. So sure enough, about 1950, they found these two animals. And look at them very carefully. The one that says 19 grams, these are 3 weeks old, and my pointer is giving me, there we go. See how much bigger this guy is? 3 grams more, he's almost 20% more. Now, maybe I wouldn't have spotted it, maybe you wouldn't have spotted it, but they spotted it, and they said, let's keep them around, see what happens. And 10 minutes later, this is what happened. So here's this guy here. He's growing up. He hasn't quite doubled in size. And this guy has gone up over 4 times larger. He now weighs over 3 times more than this guy. Now, they were very clever to see all this, right? But they weren't very clever in naming. They called this mouse the OB mouse because they figured it had some genetic problems in both its genes. But OB stands for obesity. Obesity mouse. Okay, so they weren't great. 1950s, not much work was done for another 20 years. And then a guy named Coleman had this idea. He said, you know what? I think that there's a substance in the blood that's causing this problem. Now, I really believe that, but I'm not sure which way it would go. Is there a substance in the blood that's making the thin mouse fat, or is there a substance in the blood that makes the fat mouse thin? Okay, so here's your great opportunity to join me in science, and you can have your own hypothesis. What do you think? Which way do you think it will go? Is there a substance missing in the blood of the fat animal that prevents them from being thin, or the other way around? And so, and how would you test that? So the way that Coleman did it is he took these 2 animals, he put them right together, big one, thin one, sewed them together, and eventually they began to share circulation. So they exchange bloods. Now remember, these guys are littermates, and so there's no immune reactions. And guess what? The fat mouse became thin. The fat mouse was missing something. And when you tied them together, the thin mouse's, whatever was missing, came and made the fat mouse thin. Okay. And sensational news that no one paid attention to. Another 20 years go by. Everyone forgot about these whole experiments until a young guy named Jeff Friedman used what were then modern molecular methods to figure out what this was. And it turned out to be a hormone called leptin. The OB mouse is deficient in leptin. Leptin comes from the Greek word leptos, which means thin. And this is how the system works. Let me get my pointer. Yes. So we start off here it's a negative feedback loop, right? So one part stimulates another part that inhibits the other. So it's like gas and brakes. You know, you can, one causes acceleration, one causes deceleration. Put them together, you get steady state. And if this system always worked the way it was, we would all be ideal body weight. Whatever that is, that's what we would be. So we start off here with fat. Fat secretes leptin. The more fat you have, the higher your leptin level is. Remember the obese baboons? They had higher leptin levels. Interestingly, the leptin crosses the blood-brain barrier by a very specific thing. The blood-brain barrier is the blood vessels that go through your brain. They like to keep stuff that circulates in the blood. They like to keep it out because most of those things are toxic to the brain, and it only lets in certain things. So it's not only a barrier, it's a gatekeeper, and it's a saturable transport system specific for leptin. Then once in the brain, it goes up to its receptor, lots of receptors in the brain, but the main one's in the arcuate nucleus, a part of the brain that controls eating and feeding and body weight. And there, the receptor gets activated, and a lot of complicated things happen. It tends to suppress orexogens. Those are the things that make you eat, and it stimulates the anorectics. And so overall, your desire to eat goes down. Leptin levels are high, goes down. Leptin levels are absent. The brain thinks you're starving, thinks you have no fat, and you're starving, so it stimulates eating behavior. But it does one more thing too. At the same time that it suppresses eating, it stimulates burning of calories. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, why it does that. But the point is, so if you have high fat mass, that goes high levels of leptin in the arcuate nucleus, the brain thinks, oh my gosh, I got more than enough calories what to do with. I'm going to spend less time eating, looking for food, and more time doing some other things we'll talk about. And therefore, if you're eating less, the body fat level goes down. If it goes down too much, the brain sees less leptin, and you want to eat more, negative feedback loop. So the question, and again, now we get to have another scientific, get to engage in science again, your own hypothesis. We have 5 control points here, right? We have the fat is producing leptin. We have a condition where there is no fat. Some people have no fat, and that's called lipodystrophy or some version of that. And in that case, no fat, no leptin, but those people aren't fat, they're skinny. So we know that's not what human beings have. Then there's the OBO mouse, where the fat just doesn't secrete the leptin. There's a barrier here. Maybe the blood-brain barrier doesn't transport leptin. That's a control point. The receptor may not be working, or what we would call the post-receptor. All of this machinery beyond the receptor may not be working. So we have models and situations of all of those things, and we have humans that have most of those things. In fact, almost all of those things. So here's your hypothesis. Which one does an average human have, the average obese human? Where is their main lesion? And if leptin, the clue is that these two, of course, have low leptin levels. This is what the OBO mouse has. All of these will have high levels. All of these create, in the end, a resistance to leptin. So this is like diabetes when you don't have insulin. This is like diabetes when you're resistant to the insulin. So the question is, which one do we have in humans? And the answer is, we have leptin resistance. We have, as we get more obese, we lose more and more the ability to respond to leptin. And this caused a big problem, because when they first found leptin and they found the OBO mouse, that was the cause, they thought, oh, we found the cure for human obesity. We're all going to be leptin deficient, and we just give leptin back. But alas and alack, Mother Nature pulled a trick on us, and we have the opposite. We have leptin resistance, and we still haven't quite figured this out. So where's the leptin resistance? There's three possible places: blood-brain barrier, the nucleus, the receptor, or the post-receptor. And part of the answer, this is my area. This is actually from some of our work. This is serum leptin levels. They go up as you become obese. Here's a girl with anorexia nervosa. Here's a boy with Prader-Willi syndrome, same condition we think the little girl in Spain and the Prado has. But the thing is that as serum leptin levels go up, when they're low, it's fine. A lot of leptin gets into the brain where it can work. But as the levels go up, because it's a saturable transport system, it becomes a choke point. And you can't get more and more leptin into the brain. There's a limit to how much leptin you can get into the brain. It's a big molecule, it has to be transported in, especially by the blood-brain barrier. Blood-brain barrier only has so many transporters. And actually, this can be used as evidence to argue that our ancestors and wild animals, where all this system evolved, have low body weight, because this is where it's most efficient. And that we never really evolved the mechanisms to deal with obesity. There's some other evidence for that too. So the answer is that this is where we have the problem begins. We think this is still hotly debated, but we think for some reason some signal comes from the periphery and makes the receptor less workable. And when that happens, the brain says it sees less leptin than it would ordinarily. So it sends signals, we're starving. And so we start eating more, and we get this positive feedback loop. And that the more we eat, the less the receptor works. Eventually, we overflood the system. The blood-brain barrier cannot transport anymore. It becomes a choke point. And so we wind up with these 2 points as the cause of leptin resistance. Are there any people with this, the post-receptor thing? Yes, there are, but those are very, very rare. So this is sort of how it works. We eat, and we have a balance of eating and burning calories, and that we put in fat mass. The more our fat mass, the higher our leptin levels are. Oh, my pointer isn't working. Sorry, there we go. Oh, takes a while for the pointer to come. Sorry. There we go. So calories spent, calories coming in, the difference is the fat mass. We have fat, that produces leptin. The leptin, small amounts cross the blood-brain barrier. If they're sufficient, they shut off feeding. And if they're insufficient, and they also stimulate all these things to burn calories. This is what you do when you're burning the calories if you have enough body fat. You support brain growth. You are able to sustain pregnancy so that species goes on. It helps memory and a bunch of other functions. The one really important one that I like to point out, we often don't think about, is immune function. Immune function is very expensive. So when you starve, real starvation, the immune system gets shut down, and this is why so many people start to have problems with infections and things like this. And then when we starve, there's no input. It's all burning calories. So the fat mass goes down, and there's no correlation between the body weight and leptin anymore. The fat says, look, I'm not going to send any signal out. It's really clever. I'm not going to send any signal out. Even though I've only missed a day or two of meals, that's enough for me. I'm going to tell the brain we don't have any fat. So the poor brain gets all confused. And the fat, furthermore, secretes triglycerides. That's how we're using our calories. But the triglycerides do a couple of things. They prevent what little leptin there is in the blood from getting across the blood-brain barrier. And some of it crosses and affects that receptor as well. So now there's no break on feeding. And now you spend all your time thinking about food. And remember, this doesn't have to be just when you're thin. This is even if you miss about 24 hours of feeding. And this may explain partly why it's so hard to go on a really strict diet, because your brain is saying, I'm not going to starve, okay? So anyway, it's a little hard to wrap around the idea that the absence of something stimulates something. But it's exactly what happens when you're driving down the road and you see an absence of gas. You get very stimulated to go out and find more gas. So that's exactly what's going on. The brain says there's no leptin. I have no body fat. I got to go look for food. And we see this in our ancestors, and we like to see that, but we can't really go back and study Adam and Eve. But we go back again and study the baboons again. We already see what a great model they are for us. So we went, there's these, again, got blood from some anthropologists working in East Africa. And also there's a very interesting colony of 5,000 baboons in Texas. And they live in semi-wild areas, big compound. They control how much they eat. I hear they vote Republican. I don't know if that's true or not. But at any rate, they have very low levels of leptin. And you see that the wild baboons also have really low levels of leptin. We only see levels that low when people are starving, concentration camps, cancer, things like that. And so this begins to tell us that we've evolved to really, again, going back to the idea before, we don't have a lot of body fat when we're living in the wild, be it a human or being an animal. And so the evolutionary pressure isn't to avoid obesity, it's to avoid starvation. And therefore, we really want to accumulate body fat because sooner or later there would become a day when there's no calories. So wild animals have lower leptin levels and fat reserves than are considered ideal body weight. Evolutionary pressure has been to avoid starvation, not obesity, and to preserve and accumulate body fat. We could kind of go back to our ancient ancestors when we were all hunters and gatherers in a sense, because there's still a few hunter-gatherers around in Papua New Guinea and also in some of the areas of Africa. And here's the Kunsan. The men have an average BMI of about 19.4 and women about 19.1. Now, the average athletic-looking person walking down the street has somewhere in the low 20s. And probably most of us have one's upper range, middle 20s. And if you're obese, it's about 30 and goes on up from there. So these people, you can just see how skinny they are. But it's not just our ancient ancestors. It's also in the beginning of civilization. Now, what I have to tell you is in the absence of disease, how much nutrition you got as a child dictates how tall you are. Of course, there's a genetic factor as well. But when you're talking about big populations, like the population of a country, and you really can use the average, sort of look back and say, how much nutrition did that population get when they were young? So here's the statistics from the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. This was one of the most prosperous times in Egypt. And the average man was about 5'3", and the average woman was about 4'11". So that tells us that even though this was the cradle of civilization in some sense and had a great agricultural history, that still there wasn't quite enough food to feed their children adequately. So starvation was around then. And then there's the great story of the Vasa. So about 1620, Sweden was a huge kingdom, and a very powerful nation in Europe, and was run by the Vasa family. So the king, who happened to be last name Vasa, wanted more power. And the way they were controlling the Baltic and the way to this area, and the way to get more power then was to build big warships. So he built the biggest warship to that point. Now, he not only wanted it to be big, he wanted it to be fast. So he not only made it big, he made it thin so it could sail fast. And he was probably a bit of a micromanager because the people told him, don't make it too thin. He made it too thin. It's a maiden voyage with a crew of about 16 people, rolled over from the wind, sunk to the bottom of the cold Atlantic, and that's where it remained for 350 years. You can now, long story short, it's been salvaged. You could go to the Vasa Museum in Stockholm, and I recommend that. It's great. But this is where they sailed. So you can see they're never far from land. So unlike their contemporaries that were circumnavigating the world and got scurvy and all kinds of other diseases, these guys had good nutrition. They were paid well. It was a great business to have. So they, as adults, did not have malnutrition problems. And when the Vasa was finally rediscovered and they started to bring things up, they found the skeletons of the crew. And not only did that, the preservation was so good, they found clothing. This is clothing from almost 400 years ago, sunk to the bottom of the Baltic, cold Baltic seawater. There was no oxygen, there were no bacteria, it was totally preserved. So now we can say, how tall were the men of the Vasa? And by that means, how good was the nutrition here in a relatively recent period of European history? And the answer is they weren't very tall. Here's the average Vasa. There's the one guy who was really tall, young 22-year-old. He was a giant. But you can see the rest, even including him, were 5'5". Now, if we take him out, they're even shorter, about 5'4". And today, the average Swede, by comparison, is 10.5. You know, they're really 5 feet, 10 and a half inches. They're really tall people. And so 5 inches is a lot for the same genetic pool. Again, even in this rich kingdom of Europe, at the height of European powers, 17th century culture, still not enough to eat. And it goes on even to our generation. During the Depression, Roosevelt said, I see 1/3 of the nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished. And so, again, our whole human race has been fighting obesity, and so fighting starvation and not enough to eat. So we evolved to grab onto calories. And the paleontologists tell us that we've always had a shortage of 3 things: salt, food, fat, and sugar. Salt, fat, and sugar. You stick a little cocoa in that, you got chocolate. You know, how many of our desserts, how many of the things we crave, potato chips and other things, have at least 2, if not all of these things? Also, fat is a buffer against reduced caloric intake. Thinness is an absence of that buffer. So from an evolutionary point of view, from an anthropology point of view, survival, fat is our nutritional money in the bank, our savings account. So when the next depression comes, we still have money, we still have fat when the next famine comes. Hunters and gatherers who often live in areas these days that always have food, an abundance of food, still there's variations in the availability, and they go through seasonal weight loss and gain as well. So even they have to reserve calories for a rainy day. Now, that means that the more calories you have, the more likely you are to live, the more likely you are to live, the more likely you are to reproduce, so your genes get passed on. So why are there thin people? Why are there people who are losing weight? And I've almost taken all my time giving the background, so now I'll go a little fast. So there are at least 4 causes, big causes of thinness, extreme thinness in the United States these days. One is hunter-gatherer lifestyle. I think these are the Maasai. And you see, not only are they very thin because they have good nutrition, but it's like they work hard to get it. And what's more, if you want a girlfriend, you got to do what the guy in the center has done and jump up and down. I don't know why, but you know, this is how you attract the girls. So if that's what it takes, go for it. This girl has anorexia nervosa. So psychological or physical illnesses, of course, cause weight loss. And this guy, I'm not quite sure, not quite sure, but I think I read him as being either injured or a prisoner of war in a concentration camp. So those are the three groups. And then there's the fourth one, the aging that we see, interaction of aging. And that's what I'll try to talk a little bit. And I'll try to finish in about 5 minutes, so we have lots of times for discussion. And a lot of this experience, I'll tell you, comes from a gain clinic that I run at the VA hospital, which is specifically for patients over 75, although sometimes we take younger people with significant unwanted weight loss, not caused by cancer, because the differentials and treatments are very different. And here's a typical case. The patient comes in, referred to from the doctor. They have the same story. Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so has lost a few pounds since I saw them last. And, here's a rather dramatic case. This person weighed 113 pounds just a few months ago, about 8 months ago. Now they're down to 103. That's pretty good, 10-pound weight loss in 8 months. That's significant. But luckily, the VA has this wonderful computer, has a great medical record, and we can look back of all the weights from this person goes back to 2001. And what we see is they've been losing weight for quite some time. They had a gain, but you see the overall trend is down. And here, not a few months ago, but a few years ago, they started a significant decline. So back here, their weight was about 150 pounds, and now they're down to 103 pounds. So they've lost about 31% of their body weight. We only see that in cancer patients or concentration camp patients like that. Another example with pandemic. So another way to ask this question is, once you're over 70, what's your general trend? Are you gaining weight or are you losing weight? If we ask that of 50-year-olds, they're gaining weight, battle of the bulge kind of thing. But if we ask that of people who are over 75, at least in this one study at the VA, if people were not losing weight, or if some were losing weight and an equal number were gaining weight, this would be the highest bar, but it's not. The highest bar are those that are losing about the pointer is tricky. You've got to coerce it. There we go. You got to talk it into working. The highest group is here, the group that's lost about 5 pounds from their historic weight. And you can see that there's a lot more weight losers over here than weight gainers. So we get to this age where the trend is to lose weight. Now, if you are a young person, this is how it would progress. Illness, diagnosis, treatment, and back to health. So for example, a young person might have hyperthyroidism. Single cause, you treat that, they gain weight. Now, I used to treat hyperthyroids back when I was my New Orleans days, my training days, and it was great. It just cured people with thyroid disease. But in the elderly, it's quite different. You have many, many causes of weight loss, multifactorial. And here's just a few, and this is the medical differential. And if you just go through here, we can't go through all of these because of time, but let's just take a sampling to get a feel. Polypharmacy, bunch of endocrine diseases as well. Dysphagia, it hurts to eat or hurts to swallow. Inflammatory bowel disease, malabsorption, Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease patients forget to eat. Parkinson's disease patients, they have a hypermetabolism, tooth decay, denture problems. COPD, I have lots of patients that have had such, it takes a lot of effort to breathe for those patients. And they just burn so many calories trying to breathe that they have real issues. And lots of other things as well. There's an interesting subgroup where people are eating adequate number of calories or even eating lots and lots of calories and still losing weight. And these are the four main ones. Hyperthyroidism, which is a hypermetabolic condition. Malabsorption, where the calories are there, but your gut doesn't absorb them. Glucosuria, as in diabetes or kidney disease, severe kidney disease, where the calories are just being peed out, literally. And Parkinson's, where we're not quite sure what causes it. Of course, if you have untreated severe Parkinson's, where you're trembling a lot, that burns up a huge amount of calories. But this seems to predate that obvious thing. Then there's a lot of socioeconomic factors as well. People can't afford food. People can't get to the grocery store. They can afford it. They can get to the grocery store, but they can't get it home because they're old and frail. And they can't put it up. They get too tired when they're cooking. Widows do not want to cook for one person. Widowers cannot cook. So when I started this clinic, I always thought, oh, it's the widows that's going to be the women without their husbands. They're going to be the pathetic ones, right? Because their husbands took care of them all their life. No, it's the widowers. Because men, we can't do dilly squat. Try cleaning the bathroom or change, or cooking a meal. And we can all do that like once or twice, but, every day, no, it's tough. So it's the widowers that I always feel sorry for. Social isolation, paternalism, where, the good meaning daughter or our son tells you what to eat, eat healthy foods that you hate and don't make a lot of sense anyway. And not only are there a lot of causes of these conditions, but it also tends to occur with other what we call geriatric syndromes. So if you have significant weight loss, you may have some of these things as well, propensity to fall, and perhaps some depression, frailty, a loss of muscle mass as well as fat mass, a whole lot of other things like that. So I think because of the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the approach because this really is actually a little more technical and more for docs who want to start treating these things. But I think this is a very important slide, and that is the treatment and the approach is an interdisciplinary team. It's not just me doing it. You consult with nutrition and social service, sometimes physical therapy, occupational therapy, particularly people have tremors, they need big spoons and things like that, and all kinds of other things like that. So in conclusion, what I've talked about is the brain and the gut are connected, and they're talking to each other, and they're talking to the fat as well. And weight gain and weight loss are an interplay between the social, environmental, and genetic factors. Weight is defended. That is, our body would prefer to have more fat and less fat. And our brains crave fat, salt, and sugar. Just those things that are, well, salt, but not. But the other two, just perfect for putting on the pounds. And unwanted weight loss turns out to be ironically common in the elderly. And causes of weight loss are multifactorial in the elderly and usually require a multidisciplinary team to treat. And with that is my talk, and I'd love to have discussion with you and answer any questions, or if you have answers for me, that's good too. Thank you very much.